Dr. O.C. Abraham is our teacher and mentor who has inspired and taught rational, evidence based practice, especially with the use of antimicrobials. He is widely quoted during our grand rounds and is every student's dream teacher. He did his MD General Medicine from CMC and Masters in Public Health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He has also done a fellowship in infectious diseases from Wayne State University School of Medicine, Detroit, Michigan. He is passionate about providing comprehensive care to people living with HIV infection and the rational use of antimicrobials.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me begin by saying thank you very much to organizers of CMC MAC 2020, Sudha and Soumya. It's indeed a privilege and honor to be here. Today I'll be talking about antimicrobial resistance. This is an advertisement for penicillin in the Life magazine in 1944, August of 1944. What you see is a picture of a soldier who was injured during the war and he was treated with penicillin. So the title is very apt. Thanks to penicillin, he will come home. Initially, when Alexander Fleming and his colleagues used penicillin to treat pneumococcal pneumonia and skin and soft tissue infections caused by staph and strep, the effects were really dramatic. It was almost like the Lazarus effect, patients getting up from their deathbed and walking away. I'll fast forward 75 years. This is 2019 May in CMC Hospital, Vellore. This is patient AL who was in the ICU, critically ill. He was on life supports. He was on ventilation. He was on dialysis. He was on vasopressors. He had ANCA-associated vasculitis, severe respiratory failure, hypotension, and acute kidney injury. He developed a catheter-related bloodstream infection. And as you can see here, the organism was Klebsiella pneumoniae. And if you go down the list of antibiotics which are tested against this isolate, it's horrible. It's resistant to aminoglycosides, beta-lactamase inhibitors, carbapenems, colistin, ciprofloxacin, and cotrimoxazole. The only class of drugs which it was susceptible to was tigecycline and fosfomycin, virtually untreatable infection. So what is antimicrobial resistance? It's nothing but evolution in bacteria. It's an illustration of the principle of natural selection. What we have learned is that all antibiotic use, whether it is appropriate use, inappropriate use, overuse, misuse, proper use, everything promotes development of resistance. This is a classical example of overconsumption of a common pool of resources, what is called tragedy of the commons. When I use an antibiotic to treat a patient in front of me, I'm not bothered about long-term consequences, collateral damage, resistance, etc. My only goal is to make sure that my patient gets better. All this has been aggravated by the fact that antibiotic discovery has been lagging behind. Pharma companies do not think it is worthwhile to invest in discovery and development of antibiotics any longer because it is bad investment. So in my talk, I will address two questions. How bad is the problem of antimicrobial resistance, especially in our country, and what we can do at a global level, at a national level, at an institutional level, and finally, individuals as practicing clinicians. So this slide shows you the problem of antibiotic resistance in E. coli. This is nationally representative data from our country. This is taken from CDDEP, Center for Disease Dynamics, Economics and Policy. As you can see, fluoroquinolones, ampicillin, and third generation cephalosporin, the resistance rates are more than 75%. In carbapenems, aminoglycosides, it is about 20%. In beta-lactam inhibitor combinations, it's about 30%. The only class of agent which has reliable activity against E. coli is colistin, and this is nationally representative data and isolates only from blood culture. So the question you want to ask is that why is there so much resistance? Number one, as I mentioned earlier, increased antibiotic use. Resistance mutations arise spontaneously in microorganisms. This can be in the chromosomes or this can be in the form of mobile genetic elements, plasmid-mediated resistance. So these bacteria which harbor these resistant genes are generally not very fit when compared to the wild type. By using antibiotic, you are giving an advantage to the strains which harbor resistant genes. Second important factor is that poor hygiene and infection control practices leads to spread of these resistant organisms. What we have learned over the years is that rather than looking at with a very narrow biomedical model, what are the social, economic, and anthropological factors which can impact antimicrobial resistance. This is a very important paper published in Lancet Planet Health in 2018. This picture shows the map of the globe, antimicrobial resistance, corruption and governance, and infrastructure. Green means you're doing very good. Red means you're doing very badly. If you look at India, we have very high rates of antimicrobial resistance. We have high rates of corruption, we are poorly governed, and we have poor infrastructure. And all this has contributed to increasing rates of antimicrobial resistance. If you look at Western Europe and North America, all is green. Resistance rates are low, corruption is low, governance is good, and infrastructure is good. So, from the patient's perspective and the clinician's perspective also, these are bad infections. This is a study from our own institution, MD thesis of Dr. Nalini. She looked at 163 patients with carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae causing bloodstream infections. About half of them were E. coli, 60% were males, and the mean age was about 48 years. These are very sick patients, as you can make out by the Apache scores and the Pitt bacteremia score. Most of the patients had a primary bloodstream infection, and this includes catheter-related bloodstream infections. What is horrendous here is the very high mortality rate, about 57%. And if the strain was Klebsiella, it was even higher. Primary bloodstream infection, mechanical ventilation, and CP increment score, a score which incorporates the severity of illness and the source of the bacteremia. And if the score was higher, and high Pitt bacteremia score, all were associated with even higher mortality. So this is bad news for the patients. This is another study from our microbiology department. This looks exclusively at the carbapenem-resistant Klebsiella pneumoniae bloodstream infections. If the MIC is more than 16%, mortality is 68%. And if the strain is positive for the string test, a marker of the hypervirulent mucoid strain, the mortality is 74%. So 3 out of 4 patients who develop this bloodstream infection due to these organisms, carbapenem-resistant Klebsiella pneumonia, which is hypervirulent, you have close to 75% mortality. So now that's the bad news. Now what can we do? At the national and global level, we also have to pay attention to anthropological and socioeconomic factors also. So improving sanitation, increasing access to clean water, ensuring good governance, increasing public health care expenditure, and better regulating the private health sector. All these are important things. This is at the macro level. At the institutional and individual level, the key principle is antimicrobial stewardship. So what is antimicrobial stewardship? A term you may have heard very frequently. This is nothing but a coherent set of actions which promote using antimicrobials responsibly. The key word here is responsibly, accountability. So we are accountable for every time we write a prescription for antibiotics. So this will ensure that we use antibiotics in ways that ensure sustainable access to effective therapy for all who need antibiotics. So it incorporates several principles. There is universal access. There is universal access to effective therapy. And this is a sustainable access. So in this definition, which I like a lot, we have brought in all the principles of social justice and equity. If you want to learn more about antimicrobial stewardship, there are very good resources available. These are all available for free on the internet. This is the WHO Practical Toolkit. You can download it. The other one I like very well, but much more detailed, is from the British Society of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy, BSAC. Even that is available for free. Very detailed ones. There are videos, there are PowerPoint slides, very detailed instructions how you can set up an antimicrobial stewardship program. Now, this is a very resource intense and a thankless job, taking care of antimicrobial stewardship. This study, done by Dr. Priscilla Rupali and her colleagues in CMC, has now been published. This is an audit and feedback. They looked at the ICUs in our hospital. Every time an antibiotic was written, the prescription was reviewed by a consultant ID physician, and it was considered appropriate or inappropriate, and there was a feedback to the primary team. Some horrible statistics: 73% of antibiotic prescriptions were inappropriate as per the criteria laid down. But the stewardship program was very rewarding. The antibiotic use decreased from about 831 days on treatment per 1,000 patient days. It reduced significantly to 717. And even more gratifying, even in the follow-up phase, post-intervention phase, this beneficial effect of the intervention persisted. De-escalation also improved significantly in intervention compared to baseline. However, recommendation by the ID team was accepted in only about 60% of the time. 40% of the time, the primary team chose to ignore the recommendations of the ID team. So it's resource intense and it is thankless, but it produces results. So when it comes to the individual clinician, how do you optimize use of antimicrobials? I have this 3S approach, and the 3S stand for starting an antibiotic, streamlining an antibiotic prescription, and finally stopping an antibiotic. So let's take them one by one. One is starting the antibiotics. So you should make it a habit that you restrict empiric broad spectrum antibiotic to seriously ill patients. So every time you write a prescription for piperacillin tazobactam or meropenem or imipenem, it should be only for seriously ill patients. What do I mean by that? This patient has you're very certain that this patient has a focus of infection, pneumonia, liver abscess, pyelonephritis, plus there is evidence of organ dysfunction. How do you know that? You calculate the Q-SOFA score. If it is more than 2, you go on to calculate the full SOFA score, and based on that, you decide whether the patient has significant organ dysfunction. And you should always ask yourself this question before prescribing any antibiotics. Does this patient have an infection that requires immediate or empirical antibiotics? So first question to answer, how certain are you that this patient has an infection? And if so, does he or she need immediate or empirical antibiotics? And this should be restricted to patients with infection and organ dysfunction as evidenced by the SOFA score. So this means that you don't prescribe antibiotics for fever, leukocytosis, or biomarkers like high CRP or procalcitonin. And this happens all the time in our hospital. When I am called, why is this patient on meropenem? Patient has fever, patient has leukocytosis, patient has high procalcitonin, patient has high C-reactive protein. Remember, none of these factors are sensitive or specific indicators of infection, and therefore not starting points for antibiotic therapy. Second step is about streamlining antimicrobial therapy. This is nothing but de-escalation, and this is based on antimicrobial susceptibility test report, so that you, from a shotgun approach, you move to a targeted treatment. This is also applicable to patients whose clinical status is improving. If the patient is deteriorating, of course, that's not the time when you consider streamlining antimicrobial therapy. So basically, what you're trying to do is eliminate redundant antibiotics. So you convert a broad spectrum to a narrow spectrum. You change from meropenem to aminoglycosides for a pyelonephritis. You change from combination monotherapy to single therapy. Patient came with necrotizing fasciitis. You started on vancomycin and meropenem. It came back as a group-based streptococcus, culture and susceptibility, so you changed to penicillin. And finally, discontinue if infection is unlikely. Patient was having high fever, significant organ dysfunction. You started on meropenem. Next day, you realize this is heat stroke. This is acute pancreatitis. This is a severe drug allergy. You can certainly discontinue the antibiotics. That's the ultimate de-escalation therapy. This is meant to reduce selection pressure and reduce damage to commensal microbiota, the good bacteria in the body. Numerous studies have shown that this strategy is safe and does not reduce effectiveness. A misconception which I would like to clear. Streamlining does not reduce effectiveness. The common refrain you hear in the ward is that this patient is improving on meropenem, why should I change? No, you should change for all the reasons I mentioned, and this is safe and does not reduce effectiveness. We looked at de-escalation in practice in general medical wards in CMC. This is Caroline's dissertation. She screened 1,238 patients who were started on empiric antibiotic therapy at admission. According to her study criteria, 183 patients were eligible. That means they were on empiric therapy. They had a clinical diagnosis. Later on, there was microbiological confirmation of the diagnosis. So there was an opportunity to de-escalate. So there were 183 patients whom there was an opportunity to de-escalate. And this is very gratifying. In our institution, in the medical wards, about 2/3 de-escalation happened. And de-escalation did not happen in about 37%. This is much better when compared to published literature where de-escalation happens only in about roughly 50% of the time. Should we congratulate ourselves? Not yet. We are better than many centers, but we still have a long way to go. And last is stopping antimicrobials. So the principle is shortest effective therapy. So both words are very important. Therapy is short and therapy is effective. So how do you know that patient has received adequate antimicrobials? Number one, patient has to be persistently afebrile, at least 48 hours. Second thing is that patient has stable vital signs. Patient is no longer hypotensive, patient is no longer hypoxemic, patient does not have tachypnea or tachycardia. Remember, in pneumonia, patient's cough can persist for up to a month. So continuing antibiotics in a pneumonia till the patient's symptoms are completely disappeared. No, not needed. Similarly, in a urinary tract infection, you don't have to make sure that patient has negative urine cultures and pyuria has disappeared before you stop antibiotics. This is a table from Dr. Brad Spellberg, an ID physician from the US. He looked at 12 conditions where short course and long course antibiotic therapy were compared. This is a systematic review. Everything from community-acquired pneumonia to latent tuberculosis, neutropenic fever, Plasmodium vivax malaria, gram-negative bacteremia. And every time a short course therapy was compared to a long course therapy, the result was always equal, always. Okay? And these are the number of RCTs. So the published literature is very clear. Short course therapy is as good as longer courses of therapy without all the attendant adverse effects, drug reactions, resistance, cost, etc., etc., etc. So shortest effective therapy is the mantra. And finally, about preventing infections. There are many interventions available to us today to prevent infections. Vaccines. As adult physicians, we forget vaccines. We think vaccines are only for children. But many good vaccines today, to mention few: pneumococcal vaccine, influenza vaccine annually, typhoid vaccine where it is appropriate, tetanus and diphtheria vaccines, many vaccines, hepatitis B vaccine, which are very good, cheap, effective. Infection prevention measures, universal precautions in the hospital. I mentioned about sanitation and hygiene, safe drinking water, food and safety, the social, economic and anthropological measures which are very important in propagation of antimicrobial resistance. So to conclude my presentation, I would urge that all of you are skilled diagnosticians and parsimonious prescribers. Remember, the most important thing we do in patient care on our day-to-day rounds or outpatient or emergency department is making an accurate diagnosis. That's a key for appropriate therapy. And when it comes to prescribing antibiotics, we should be stingy, parsimonious prescribers. Second thing is that, remember, always streamline empiric therapy. We work in CMC Vellore. We have access to a very good, excellent microbiology laboratory. They are always willing to help. So once the results are back, streamline empiric therapy, targeted therapy, from shotgun approach to targeted therapy. And monotherapy is sufficient for most patients. Apart from tuberculosis, HIV infection, infective endocarditis or treatment of prosthetic joint infections, most infections need only single antibiotics. Combination is very little role. And finally, always use the shortest effective course. I will conclude here. I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments you may have. Thank you very much.